Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's journey. We're heading to ancient Rome, where the religion of the goddess Vesta gave rise to the Vestal Virgins, women so powerful that not even a king could offend them. No one, not even the ruler, was allowed to insult a Vestal Virgin, and vice versa. But when a Vestal broke the rules, she got what she deserved for having desecrated the sacred flame in the temple. She would be locked in a chamber and starved to death, or buried alive in front of the shrine. And that's not all. If the city or the nation was on the brink of war or chaos, the Vestal Virgin was the first to be blamed. Before we begin, if you truly feel this is a gentle place to rest at night, hit like and subscribe, but only if you really want to. No pressure. Just like the rules in an old tavern. You're only here if you need a quiet place. And you know what I love most? Reading the comments and seeing where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 a.m. or 5, you're still here. And I see you. Now turn off the lights and turn on a little fan if you have one. Not because it's hot, but for that soft humming sound. You're about 6 years old, maybe 7. You've just learned to tie your sandals without your mother's help. You're still playing with straw dolls. You still believe that if you run fast enough, you might fly. Then one morning, instead of honey bread or your mother's lullaby, there's a knock at the door. A man in a white toga, followed by armed guards. He doesn't smile. He doesn't ask anything. He just looks at you like he's examining an ancient vase, checking for cracks. Then he points. This child, chosen as a Vestal. You think it's the name of a flower or a new game. You look at your parents. Your father stands like a statue. Your mother covers her mouth with a cloth. Your grandmother says an honor, but her eyes never leave your hand. You don't understand. You whisper, "Can I bring my teddy bear?" Vestal Virgin, the keeper of the flame. A title everyone respects and no one wants. They didn't pick you because you were talented, but because you looked pure. Because your father was just noble enough and just poor enough to need the honor. Because Vesta, goddess of the hearth, needed someone to guard her fire with their entire life. You couldn't say no. No one asked if you wanted this. You walk into the temple like entering a marriage with no groom. In front of the sacred altar, among incense and cold stone, you take your first vow. I swear to keep my chastity for 30 years. 30 years. In your mind, that's how many candies it would take to finish a jar of honey. You don't know what chastity means. You only know that all the adults suddenly look serious when that word is spoken. After the ceremony, you don't get to go home. No one hugs you. No one says, "Good girl." You're led into the temple as if being swallowed by a wall of stone. Then, you're brought to a small stone chamber where the rebirth ritual begins. There's no baptismal font, no priest. Only a bowl of cold water, what they call Vesta's silent water. You're told to wash your hands, wash your face. Then an old priestess cuts a lock of your hair. Not long, not painful, but cold. That lock is placed in the sacred flame, as an offering, as if to tell the gods, this little girl now belongs to you. Then a red thread is tied around your wrist. No one explains it, but you know, with a soft, instinctive sense, that from now on, every thread in your life will not be tied with love, You wake up on your first morning in the temple. No mattress. No birdsong. No smell of burnt bread from your mother's kitchen. Only cold stone and the crackling of fire, the only sound reminding you that you're still alive. The room you stay in is called the Atrium Vestae, the residence hall of the Vestals. Sounds fancy, but in reality, it's a row of tiny rooms, floored with tiles as hard as Rome's backbone. No toys, no paintings on the wall. Just a bronze bowl, a low wooden shelf, and a white robe hanging straight like a shadow. Before anything begins, you notice something strange on the shelf. A bronze mirror, small, old, its surface turned down. You curiously reach to flip it when a voice sharp as a dry blade cuts in. Do not look. The chief vestal steps forward, flips the mirror back down, this time pressing it deeper like sealing a coffin lid. Here, we do not gaze at ourselves, we gaze at the flame. You don't understand, but your back turns cold. You are not allowed to see yourself, not allowed to witness how your eyes have changed. From that day on, you begin to forget your own shape, bit by bit. No one answers. You whisper, "My name is Julia." But the words fall to the floor like a pebble without an echo. And then footsteps approach. An old nun, the chief vestal, enters. She doesn't ask if you're hungry. She doesn't ask if you're afraid. She just looks at you like a seed just sown into stone. Get up. Lesson time begins. The first lesson has no alphabet, no games, no rewards. You learn how to walk softly, evenly, without stepping over sacred tiles. You learn how to nod, respectful, but not bowed like a slave. You learn how to stay silent, as Romans speak of you like a revered object, without the right to speak. Then you're taken to the sacred fire, the one that must never go out. It's not big, not fiercely blazing. Just a small, calm flame, breathing steadily like the ancient breath of Rome. But everyone approaches it solemnly. A nun points at the flame and says, "If it goes out, the whole city will know your name." You don't fully understand, but you notice how the adults avoid the wind, how they lower their heads when passing by, and you begin to fear. Not the fear of being scolded, but fear that you, a child who doesn't even know how to light a fire, are now responsible for keeping a whole empire alive. Every step is a test. Every motion of your hand is under scrutiny. During recess, you sit in the corner of the stone courtyard, away from adult eyes. An older girl, probably a third-year vestal, sits beside you. She says nothing, but silently offers a small stone, shiny, round like a marble. You're about to touch it when she pulls it back, her eyes darting toward the hallway. The chief vestal is standing there, silent, but her eyes sharp as razors. The girl sneaks the stone into your sleeve and walks away without a word. That night, you take out the stone and look at it under the firelight. It's not big, but cool to the touch, and has a swirl like a tiny flame. It's the first gift you've ever received, not from family, not from a teacher, but from another girl also locked inside this motherless castle. You keep that stone like the last piece of warmth you have left. Every motion of your hand is under scrutiny. You don't understand why they need you to keep the fire, when inside you're growing colder. At noon, while Rome bustles outside, you eat a silent meal. A slice of hard cheese, a few figs, a bowl of lukewarm water. You try to use your left hand for the knife because you're left-handed. Immediately, a nun across the table slams her hand on the wood her gaze icy. The left hand is the hand of darkness. The left hand is the hand of sin. She yanks the knife from your grasp, places it in your right hand, and whispers like a snake. From now on, everything of yours, your hand, your speech, your thoughts, must be clean. You don't dare ask what clean means. You only bow your head, holding the knife like a blade aimed at yourself. No one laughs. No one speaks. Only eyes watching. Did you hold the knife with the wrong hand? Did you drop a crumb? Did you breathe too hard? A slice of hard cheese, a few figs, a bowl of lukewarm water. No one laughs. No one speaks. Only eyes watching. Did you hold the knife with the wrong hand? Did you drop a crumb? Did you breathe too hard? In this place, even breathing wrong is a minor sin, and minor sins, when added up, become cracks in the sacred vase. And a vestal must not crack. At night, you don't cry. You know no one will come to comfort you. Before bed, the younger vestals line up in a long hallway, each holding a small candle. When the bronze bell rings 3 times, each candle is blown out, in order of age. You are the last. When your turn comes, the chief vestal says nothing. She just looks at you, and you must blow it out yourself. The final light disappears from your hand like a farewell without words. Darkness swallows everything, but the wind still whispers down the corridor. You hear no lullaby, no good night, only silence, thick as ash. You look up at the vaulted ceiling, where firelight casts flickering shadows. You wonder, is this home? You know no one will come to comfort you. You look up at the vaulted ceiling, where firelight casts flickering shadows. You wonder, is this home? And your heart answers with a missed beat. No, this is not home. This is the castle where little girls are turned into stone walls. You once tried to open the main door, the one that led to the large courtyard paved with white stone. Your hand touched the bronze latch, and you discovered there was no handle on the inside, not because it was locked, but because it wasn't designed to open from your side. You stood there, hand on the smooth surface of the door, suddenly realizing this place didn't need guards, because every way out had been erased from the beginning of its construction. They called you a holy virgin. They offered you flowers at every Vesta festival, but you weren't allowed to touch flowers, because flowers belong to weddings, and you would never be wed. In the morning, you memorized prayers in Old Latin. Not a single syllable could be wrong. If you messed up, you had to stand the entire noon under the dome as hot as a furnace. In the afternoon, you wiped dust off the altar with cloth soaked in ash. You weren't allowed to leave fingerprints, because every mark was a sin unwashed. Once a week, you were led out to the ash-drying yard. It was where they spread sacred ash over the stone floor to dry under the sun. You had to rake the ash with your bare hands, spread it evenly, no clumps, no spilling past the edges. An old priestess sat on a high step, holding a feather fan, not for cooling, but to lightly flick your hands if you slipped up. When done, you were required to shake your hands clean until no grain of ash remained, because if anything lingered, it meant you kept something meant to be offered. And in the evening, you blew out the candle. Repeat, 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 until you memorized every crack in the tiles like the names of relatives. Once, you happened to see a stray cat. You reached out your hand, and it tucked its ears, ran away. You didn't understand. Then an older Vestal whispered, "Animals don't like places without human warmth." You didn't know whether to laugh or cry, because you were still human, weren't you? You were taught how to offer sacrifices, not with sincerity, but with the correct tilt of the wrist, the proper pace of kneeling, the right height when lifting the offering tray. You practiced the rituals before a dim bronze mirror. At first, you thought it was to check your movements, but after a few days, you realized the mirror didn't show a clear face. You could see your hands, but not your eyes. You saw your bowed shape, but not who was bowing. The longer you looked, the more unsure you became. Was there anyone living in that mirror? Or just rituals, rituals, and more rituals? Each practice session, a priestess recorded mistakes, not to correct you, but to document. 7 mistakes, and you'd be barred from the main ceremony that year. You didn't feel sad about that. You only felt sad because you were used to living as if you were the mistake. One day, you slipped up a word during a prayer lesson. No one scolded you. No one lashed. No one yelled. But for the next 3 days, no one spoke to you. No one called your name. No one walked beside you in the hallway. You ate alone, prayed alone, blew out your candle alone. And slowly, you started talking to yourself in your head, because if you didn't, you were afraid you'd disappear. One day, you heard children's voices outside the temple. You ran to the window. The children were playing under the sun. They shouted loudly, ran fast, tripped and burst out laughing. You smiled, unconsciously, then suddenly realized none of them were chosen. And for the first time in your life, you envied the children who weren't deified. You weren't loved, but you were revered. You didn't have the right to choose someone to lie beside. But the entire Roman Republic, from commoners to senators, had the right to monitor your private life. Your virginity was no longer yours. It became collateral for national security. People believed if a Vestal lost her virginity, the flame of Vesta would go out and Rome would fall. And so everything around you was monitored. You weren't allowed to be alone with any man, weren't allowed to laugh too loudly in front of strangers, weren't allowed to go anywhere without a priestess escort. And if a man, soldier, priest or senator, accidentally looked into your eyes too long, he'd be reprimanded. You once witnessed a guard reassigned from the temple grounds for having an attitude unfit toward a living goddess. After that, every man looked at you, as if looking over your shoulder. No one dared say your name, nor ask if you were okay. You got used to the fact that you were both present and not allowed to be present. Each morning, before ritual began, you had to let an elder priestess inspect your hair to see if any strand was tangled, any mark suspicious. And on full moons, you were summoned privately, no name called, to a closed room in the back courtyard. There, the High Vestal would inspect your body. No one said what they were inspecting, but you knew. Every strange spot on your skin, every red mark on your neck, every minor change in your body could be a sign of forbidden things, not to protect you, but to protect the god's reputation. You weren't sure whether to feel ashamed or laugh, but you got used to the feeling of being an object on display, never owned by yourself. Once, A rumor spread that a Vestal was suspected of having a relationship. No one knew who started it. Maybe it was a guard's gaze lingering too long. Maybe it was a smile while passing through the market. Maybe just footsteps at an unusual hour. And that was enough. She wasn't judged by words, nor by evidence. She was brought to court, sentenced, and buried alive. She didn't cry, didn't scream, only remained silent, like all the goddesses who ever lived like prisoners. You didn't know if it was true. You only knew that day. The sky turned grey, the colour of the elder priestess's robes, and the flame of Vesta was relit, as if Rome had just escaped doom. They whispered that the fire had gone out the night she was taken. A strange wind or a shiver from the gods, no one knew. But to Rome, that was a sign. Someone had done the unforgivable, and that was enough. Whether there was evidence or not, whatever the truth was, if the flame went out, someone had to die, even after she vanished. People avoided stepping on a square stone near the temple courtyard. An old priestess once whispered, "Beneath it is the path to a place no one returns from. No marker, no name, only a rocky chamber and an oil lamp, so death wouldn't happen in total darkness. You never looked down there, because if you did, you were afraid you'd see yourself, a future version no one dared to name. But you knew one thing. From that day on, you no longer dreamed about love. The Romans loved fire, but what they loved even more than fire itself was the fear that kept it burning. And if you were a young Vestal, you learned that soon enough. Not through books, but through bruises on your hands, lashes on the soles of your feet, and the cold gaze from the woman who once held your hand the first time you stepped into the temple. The fire of Vesta, the sacred flame in the temple, must never go out, not even for a single night. And the firekeeper, you, were never allowed to be tired, never allowed to doze off, never allowed to close your eyes unless someone officially replaced your shift. If the fire went out, even for a moment, the one responsible would be punished that very night. No one would touch you with bare hands. The high priestess would pull out a sacred rod, its tip wrapped in copper wire, inscribed with the word "pax," a word that meant peace, but used to strike the flesh of those who disrupted the empire's peace, not with a sword, but with a wet leather whip. You once saw a Vestal tied to the stone pillar beside the temple. No screams, only the sound of leather striking sweat-drenched flesh. The person doing the beating wasn't a soldier. It was the high priestess, and the others, the rest of the Vestals, had to look straight ahead, not allowed to turn away. You remember one time you nearly nodded off. The air that day was freezing, and your eyelids were heavy as lead. You woke up just a few minutes later, the flame still alive, but the high priestess had already been standing there. No scolding. But the next morning, during breakfast, your portion was salted so heavily it was almost choking. A quiet reminder from the kitchen that we are not allowed to close our eyes. No one called it punishment. You were even taught the technique of how to light the fire properly. It wasn't as simple as just setting it alight. You had to choose the right kind of wood. Oak to burn long, pine to catch quickly. Wood too damp would smoke. Wood stacked incorrectly would snuff out halfway. One time you chose wrong. Smoke rose high, triggering the alarm bell in the courtyard. You were summoned and made to stand in the stone-paved yard. No one said anything. Just one sentence. A wrong fire is like lying to the gods. The next morning, while fetching water, you saw a trail of candle wax mixed with blood along the stone steps behind the temple. Not much, just enough to chill your spine. One Vestal didn't appear that day. No one mentioned her name, but that night, wind slid through the corridor, carrying the smell of burned wood and something rusted. But eventually, you understood. No one punished you more than the fear you carried yourself. Every time the fire flickered, your heart sank. Every time the wind howled, your eyes burned from staying up all night. You also realized the lashes never left scars, because your body, they said, belonged to the gods. So punishment had to be painful enough, but never tear the flesh, never break a bone, never leave a mark. They used thin leather, soaked in water, cooled, so it sank deep into muscle without a trace on the surface, as if to say, we don't punish, we simply remind through pain. And then, when everything went quiet again, you realized you no longer thought about the gods. You only thought about the fire and the whip. You were not allowed to smile, at least not while being seen. As a Vestal, every movement you made was a ritual. Every nod was a sacred signal. And if you smiled at the wrong time, looked at the wrong person, spoke too much, you were no longer a living goddess. You became a threat to national stability. One time, you smiled when a little girl in the temple tripped, not out of cruelty, just because the moment was too innocent. A story you'd heard before, thought was just rumor. Another Vestal, years ago, also smiled once during a ceremonial procession, just a fleeting smile. But 3 days later, soldiers came. They searched the temple, lifted even the cloth covering the offering table. They said, we must make sure no one is hiding anything behind that smile. And the very next day, the high priestess whispered, a smile at the wrong time can make all of Rome question the purity of this temple. Another time, you walked past the square, saw a young soldier slip because the ground was wet. You covered your mouth to stifle a laugh. You'd also once seen a bronze shield fall from a guard's hand, spinning on the stone floor like a coin. Instinctively, you watched it and let out a soft chuckle. Just a glance. And the next day, that guard was no longer on duty. You covered your mouth and laughed. The next day, he vanished from the watch. No one said anything. But when you asked, only an old Vestal replied, it wasn't his fault. It was your eyes that made people think otherwise. You didn't fully understand until you realized during a ritual to the god Mars, a young Vestal was once chosen to tie a ribbon to the Legion standard. Just because her expression at that moment seemed overly excited, the ritual was paused. The entire ceremony was moved to another day. She was never invited again. And Rome, this empire, does not tolerate unsanctioned declarations. You once asked a naive question. If there's something joyful, may I smile? And the answer was just a long, unblinking stare. Much later, an older Vestal gently said, you no longer have a name. Why would you still need laughter? From that moment, you learn to smile inside your head. All emotions must be silent, hidden beneath the white robe, under cold stone walls. You are no longer a person, you are a symbol. And symbols are not allowed to smile. The walls around you, there's one section of the western wall that was rebuilt, not due to cracks, not because of war. They whispered, someone once smiled there and disappeared. The story was never written. Only the new bricks mismatching the old stone remained. You never dared look at that spot for long, because here, even the bricks know how to keep secrets. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows. Even the only man allowed to enter the temple, the Pontifex Maximus, is never allowed to stay too long. Every conversation with him has its duration recorded. If it exceeds 15 minutes, a purification ritual will be performed. No one is allowed to love anyone, even if that person is a god. In the Temple of Vesta, love is something not allowed to be named, not because you are a goddess, but because if people even suspect you know love, Rome will no longer believe you can keep the fire. You must not look at anyone for too long, must not show even a flicker of hesitation when a young man passes by. But the opposite, every eye lingers on you, not because they love you, but because they fear that you might love someone. A Vestal was once convicted just for often standing near the door whenever the guards changed shifts. Before that, a young man had once left a wreath at the temple gate in the morning. No letter, no name. But they hunted him down, and 3 days later, he was interrogated to death. Not because of wrongdoing, but because someone believed a Vestal had smiled when she saw the wreath. No proof, just a habit. Just a few times she smiled upon hearing boots tapping stone, and that was enough to be buried alive. You remember once, a young soldier bowed to you, too deeply, too slowly. You nodded in return, and for the next 3 days, no one in the temple spoke to you. No one gave orders. But every footstep edged farther away. Every prayer was whispered without inviting you to join. You once heard footsteps behind you, not from a soldier, but from another Vestal, not because she hated you, but because if you did something wrong, she would get to live. Here, firekeepers must also safeguard their own lives, and to stay alive, they must keep everyone's eyes fixed on you. Suspicion needs no reason. It rises like moisture in the night, seeping through the white robe and into your collar. One night you stayed up with a stomachache. The next morning, someone whispered, "She looks a little tired." That afternoon, you were summoned for a health check, but no one really cared about your stomach. They just wanted to know, who were you with last night? Love is forbidden, but the suspicion that you might be in love is what truly terrifies. You start avoiding all eyes, not looking at soldiers, not walking across the square, not pausing near the gate. You turn yourself into a cloth-covered stone, a pillar without a ripple. Because you know, if someone in the temple needs to prove their loyalty, all they have to do is point to you and say, "She looked," and that is enough. Rome will hear, Rome will believe, and you will be buried, not because you loved, but because you didn't look away fast enough. You once lived with a very quiet Vestal. She didn't talk much, didn't smile, never stepped outside her designated area. But that silence, over time, became the loudest sound. Everyone started whispering, "She's hiding something." No one saw anything. Nothing happened. It's just that she was too quiet. And to Rome, even silence can be a crime. You are not killed like a criminal. You are buried like someone who was once sacred, Before the trial begins, everything is prepared with the care of a holy ritual. No screaming, no beatings, no blood. Just a ceremony that is very clean, very solemn, and very lonely. They call the place where you will be buried the Lokapura, the pure land. It lies outside the city gates, where no one is allowed to dig, where no marker is allowed to stand. Because if someone grieves, Rome must pretend not to see. Because if someone remembers you, Rome will see it as an offense to the gods. You are given fresh robes. You are led past a silent crowd. You are called the one who lost the light, like Vestal Cornelia in 90 BCE, who was not forgiven just because her walk changed after a ceremony. She returned to the temple with a different expression, a bit absent, a bit tired, and her steps not as steady as usual. No one ever caught her with anyone. Just that, according to a record keeper, her eyes no longer looked like a still flame. No one looks you in the eye, but everyone wears the solemn face of someone attending someone else's wedding. You step into a sealed carriage, no windows. No one says you are guilty. Only that Rome cannot accept a goddess who might have felt something stir in her heart. The tomb has already been dug in an underground chamber. Inside is a bed, a candle, some bread, and a jug of water. They say, "We do not kill you. We let you live with your own fire." When the tomb door closes, no one hears a scream, not because you didn't scream, but because even the earth understands a Vestal suspected should leave no echo behind. Above, Rome continues to pray and calls it divine forgiveness. That very same day, a 6-year-old girl is led into the temple. She does not understand why her mother is crying, does not understand why she is not allowed to look back. But when they say, "Learn to keep the fire," she nods and asks no more questions. No one speaks of the one just buried, only that a new Vestal must be anointed, and Rome needs someone to believe the fire is still burning. Your body used to be yours, before it was called belonging to the divine. You used to know when you were hungry, when you were tired, when the strap was too tight and bothered your skin. But from the moment you entered the temple, all those sensations had to be forgotten. No one taught you how to listen to your body. They only taught you how to cover it in cloth. When you felt tired, they would place a hand on your forehead and say, "Perhaps you haven't prayed enough." When you felt pain, they said, "It's a trial to prove your purity." You weren't allowed to scratch yourself, couldn't smooth your hair, couldn't touch your chest to adjust your ceremonial robe. Every unconscious movement could be deemed intentional. A Vestal was once recorded as failing to maintain sacred posture, simply because she turned her body 3 times during a ritual without permission. 3 times in 30 years. And that was enough. You slept on a stone bed, no pillow, no blanket, just a white cloth, so thin it only covered, not warmed. You didn't dare curl up, didn't stretch your arms too far, afraid the temple guards might think you were dreaming something you shouldn't. On the days of your menstruation, if you had them, you weren't allowed to speak, because mentioning blood was mentioning the profane. Because if anyone knew, they would doubt whether you kept the flame clean enough. Your body gradually became a map with no roads. You no longer remembered the feeling of each fingertip. You no longer dared look into a mirror, because mirrors also reflect life. In fact, mirrors were banned throughout the temple of Vesta. No reflective objects were allowed in the prayer room, not even water surfaces. It was once told that a priestess accidentally saw her reflection in a well and had to undergo a purification ritual with salt and ash, not because she did anything wrong, but because Rome could not accept anyone seeing themselves. There are records that some priestesses, by their 25th year, could no longer define the boundaries of their own bodies. Some panicked when touching their own skin because they thought it was an offense against the gods. One, named Licinia, once woke in the night, terrified after dreaming she had an uncovered body. She voluntarily fasted for 7 days to cleanse the dream. There was a case of a priestess named Amelia who was found whispering to herself just that. She sat in the corner of the temple, knees hugged to her chest, and kept repeating a sentence, "I am me, I am me." The temple guard thought she was possessed, but when the other priestesses came to see, they said, "She's trying to remember her body." Rome didn't give her more time. She was taken away for isolation. No one heard her voice again. You learn to exist like a statue that breathes, and every breath had to be very soft, very light, very not you. Rome didn't need you to be healthy, didn't need you to be happy. Rome only needed you not to make others think about the body, even when that was your own body. You once had a name, once had a father who called you my daughter. Once had a mother who untangled your hair when it knotted, then sighed and said, "You're really growing up." But from the day you entered the temple of Vesta, all those memories were wrapped up in 2 words, sacred object. Your real name, once carved into the wall of your parents' home, was no longer mentioned. Documents about you only referred to you by rank. 3rd Vestal, youngest priestess. If you were obedient, history would forget you. If you made a mistake, your name would be carved, but onto the stone of punishment. That's the paradox of sacred objects. Only when you fail do you get a name. No one called you a woman. No one asked if you had reached puberty. No one asked what you wanted, what food you liked, what scared you, whether you'd ever had a friend to confide in. You became a breathing symbol, a human stripped of everything human. When someone spoke about you, they used words like the living flame. Representative of the gods, child of Rome, but never, ever she. You weren't allowed to show personality, couldn't reveal any distinct traits. No handwriting, no scent of perfume, not a single strand of hair out of regulation. You were a role model, but no one asked. A model of what? And for what purpose? One time you sneezed during the fire procession. No one said anything. But 3 days later, all the priestesses were summoned for health checks. You understood. Rome didn't care about viruses. Rome only cared about unusual signs from a sacred object. You once cried because you missed home, but then you realized sacred objects don't have homes. You once smiled when a kitten ran across the temple porch, but then you were summoned for questioning, because sacred objects aren't allowed to react to mundane things. One day, you dreamed you were playing with your childhood friends in the village. The next morning, you told the dream to an older Vestal. She was silent for a long while, then said, "Don't remember, because if you still see yourself as human, Rome will think you're no longer a sacred object, and sacred objects must never be doubted, must never dream, laugh, yawn, have stomach aches, sulk, or sigh, must not live as someone who could make mistakes. You became something sacred, not because you chose to, but because others found it easier to control you once you were placed on an altar. And sometimes, Rome didn't just put you on an altar, but on a palanquin. During major festivals, you would be paraded through the city like a living symbol. You wore pure white robes, laurel wreaths, couldn't blink too often, couldn't turn your head, couldn't let your feet touch the ground. You were no longer someone carrying the ritual, you were the offering. No one applauded, no one cheered. Only the silence of reverence and the loneliness of being encased. You were the sacred object, and Rome needed you silent to preserve sanctity. No one said you were pretty or not. No one mentioned your age. No one said you would grow old, because sacred objects had no time. Sacred objects were a form of existence frozen in place. All maturity, change, growth were signs of breaking the image. A vestal was once punished for maturing too visibly. Her chest grew larger than the others her age, and people began whispering, "Something's not right." She was put on a diet, made to wear an extra tight layer of fabric. Every time she passed a high-ranking official, she had to bow lower than usual, all because she looked like a woman. Rome didn't want a woman to keep the flame. Rome wanted a being, ageless, sexless, emotionless, to keep the flame. You were the sacred object, and as a sacred object, you were no longer human. You completed the mission. 30 years of keeping the flame. 30 years of not letting anyone touch you, not letting the fire go out, not letting Rome be bothered. They call you the one who kept her vow. Then they open the gate. Then they say, "Freedom. From today on, you are free." You stand in the crowded street. No one guarding you, no one watching you, no one welcoming you either. You're a former sacred being, and Rome has no place for what's already fulfilled its duty. You try walking to the market. People look at you, then avoid you. They're not used to seeing a vestal outside the temple. They think you bring bad omens. You try smiling at a child. It bursts into tears. You want to try something with a strong smell, like grilled fish or moldy cheese, but the smell makes you nauseous. Your stomach is used to fasting. You try sitting on a sunlit porch. Then you realize you don't know what to do next. Don't know where to put your hands. Don't know how long is long enough to sit. For 30 years, you weren't allowed to hug anyone. Weren't allowed to be hugged. Weren't allowed to lean your head on a shoulder, to stroke someone's hair, to let someone stroke yours. Rome taught you how to stay chaste, but never taught you how to love. One night, you dream you're 7 years old. Your father lifts you up after a ceremony. You bury your face into his chest, the scent of sweat mixed with pine wood. You wake up crying because you realize it's been 30 years since you've been in a hug. No one forbids you from loving anymore. No one forbids you from touching. No one forbids you from saying what you want. But now, you no longer know what it means to want. You've been set free, like a bird who's lived in a cage all its life. When the door opens, it doesn't fly, just stands there and trembles. You know that, by law, you can marry. Rome says so, on paper. But in life, no one wants to marry someone who lived 30 years as a divine embodiment. They believe you're cursed. They're afraid you bring bad luck. They whisper, calling you widow of the fire god. Even though you've never loved anyone, you are free. But no one opens their heart to you anymore. You receive your inheritance, land and gold your family once offered when sending you to the temple. In theory, you can sell them, rent them, or farm them, but no one dares touch land that belonged to a living relic. They call it sacred land. Sacred, so no one dares step on it. Sacred, so no one wants to live near it. You have property, but you can't spend it. You have gold, but even the baker refuses to take your hand to count change. Rome kept you whole, and Rome let you go, wholly. No one held you back. No one saw you off. No one hugged you. Even death refuses you a place to belong. You once heard priests whisper, Vestal can't be buried with family, can't be laid in the citizen cemetery. You'll be buried in a separate section, like a ritual object once used. Now no one knows where to place it. You are no longer kin, no longer clergy. You are a strange thing no one dares inscribe on a tombstone, and you begin to understand. Chastity can be protected, but a heart, if never loved, will disappear on its own. You once heard a story of a priestess who let the flame die on purpose. After 10 years as a Vestal, she let the sacred fire fade, in silence. She was caught, investigated, put on trial. When asked why, she only said, I just wanted someone to touch me. She was buried alive, but witnesses swore she died with a smile. Rome never understood why. No one ever asked what you dreamed during 30 years as a Vestal, and you never told. In your dreams, you don't wear white robes. You don't guard fire. You don't sit upright on marble slabs. You dream of running, barefoot, through fields where grass grows above your knees. You dream of laughing, laughing loud, laughing until your stomach hurts, and no one scolds you. Some nights, you dream your hair is tangled, and someone gently untangles each strand. Some nights, you dream of hands lightly resting on your ceremonial robe, not forceful, not wrong, just a touch, soft, silent, and you wake, heart pounding like a drum on a hollow chest. You're not allowed to tell those dreams to anyone, because a Vestal must not dream. Even sleep is part of the ritual, and dreaming is the part you're not allowed to remember. You train yourself to forget, to extinguish both dreams and needs. You remind yourself, if no one remembers it, it never happened. You hypnotize yourself into being an idol. Don't breathe hard. Don't walk fast. Don't say anything that might worry others. Rome wants you clean even in your dreams, and you do it well. You sleep on a stone bed, no softness, no blanket, no warmth. Sleep is not for rest, it's a ritual. Every move can be watched. You once heard of a Vestal punished for jumping up after a nightmare and spilling a jar of holy water. No one cared about the dream, just that it spilled out. Still, every night before drifting off, you whisper a line to no one. Please don't let me dream again. You're not afraid of dreaming. You're afraid of waking. There are nights when a dream repeats 7 times. You stand before a stone door, knock softly, then harder, then scream. No one opens it. Behind the door, there are sounds of water flowing, of laughter. You try to remember their faces, but they turn away. Always turn away. You wake, soaked in sweat, heart cold like someone poured ashes on a flame. You tell no one. Because even dreams, if told, can be judged. Once, You whispered a dream to the handmaiden you had as a child. Just a dream of your mother stroking your hair. The next morning, she disappeared. No one explained why. Only the looks in the temple, silent as whetstones. From then on, you learned to swallow your dreams, because even witnesses can be sinners. You once heard the story of Vestal Licinia, accused not for an act, but for a gaze. A wealthy official wanted her land, couldn't find a fault, so he made up a rumor. She dreams too much, her eyes are no longer pure, her heart no longer still. No evidence, just public opinion. That was enough. She was tried, acquitted, but no one looked her in the eye again. From a sacred symbol, she became a ghost, living right in the middle of Rome. No one touched you for 30 years, but Rome did, touched every other part of you, every single day. You didn't lose your virginity. You kept your vow. You never looked at a man with anything but ritualistic innocence. But you lost everything else. You lost your childhood at the entrance ceremony when you were 6, handed over like an offering. You lost your parents. They could no longer hug you when they wanted, only watch you from afar during ceremonies. You lost your real name. People called you Vestal, Vesta's vessel, as if you'd never been a little girl with a short name and a wooden doll. You lost your laughter, because laughter was considered loud, lacking decorum. You lost your tears, because crying might be seen as weakness, as loss of control, a danger to the divine. You lost the right to love, not just to love others, but the right to love yourself. One day, you stood before a bronze mirror, looked closely, and realized you couldn't even name the parts of your body. Breasts were places not to be touched. Hips were parts to be covered. Hands were used to hold offerings. Feet were things that take you to rituals. No part of you belonged to you anymore. You didn't lose your virginity, but you lost yourself. You weren't allowed to get sick or die. One Vestal had a high fever during winter, yet had to stand through a 2-hour ritual in the temple courtyard, legs trembling, hands blue, mumbling prayers through broken breath. No one asked how she was. No one let her sit. Another, older, once collapsed in the temple, but because no one could break the ritual, they left her lying there until she stopped breathing. Her body was taken away in silence. No funeral, no name, no farewell. You still remember, because that day, they made you scrub the floor where she had fallen. You were once summoned to the courtyard over a glance. A guard said your look seemed unusually warm. The chastity board was convened, though no one dared to convict you. But after that, every step you took in the temple was watched. Every glance could become a file. And that kind of loss had no trial, no sentence, no grave, just a hollow, long as a sob swallowed inside a shrine. One day, Prince Gaius came to make an offering. You stood solemn, as always, but his gaze lingered a breath too long. That same day, you were pulled from the line. No one accused you, no one spoke, but from then on, you were never allowed to stand beside the others. You became the one who could disturb a royal mind. From a symbol, you turned into a threat, not because you did something wrong, but because you were a woman, and they feared you being seen as human. You weren't born to be a person. You were chosen to be the soul of a city. A city stayed alive because of the flame you kept. That flame wasn't just any flame. It was the sacred fire of Vesta, and if it ever went out, Rome would fall. Only 6 women, 6 names never called, 6 heads always neat, 6 lives with no normal old age, had to guard it in turns without a single moment of neglect. You kept the fire with your life. Some nights the wind would rise, and all of Rome would fall silent. You'd kneel, hands trembling, eyes wide, chanting prayers, stacking logs, toes curling from cold, to make sure Rome didn't burn from the inside. If the flame went out, you could be beaten, stripped of title, buried alive. And because the flame couldn't go out, you weren't allowed to be sad, angry, sick, homesick, or shed a tear. You didn't have the right to be human. But you were the reason Rome never crumbled under its own fear. You were the spiritual wall, built from silence, sacrifice, and virginity carved hard like stone. They said you were a symbol. They said you must not be loved. But they, in panic, when enemies stormed the gates, when omens filled the sky, would kneel before you, begging you to light more fire, to say another prayer. You weren't allowed to be human, but you kept Rome breathing. No one remembered your name, but no one could live if you were gone. You once wanted to cry, but you learned to smile silently. You once wanted to scream, but you learned to stare without blinking. You once wanted to hug someone, but you only held the fire and the hope of a city with no heart. Next story. Roman Republic, from year 509 to year 27 before the Common Era. Founded in year 509 before the Common Era, after the army, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, overthrew King Tarquinius Superbus. The Roman Republic thrived through its unique political system with the Senatus, Senate, and Comitia, Democratic Assembly. During this period, Rome took control of the Italian peninsula, defeated Carthage in the First and Second Punic Wars year 164 before the Common Era, and expanded its territory through Greece and the Mediterranean region. Julius Caesar became a crucial figure as he ended the Republican period and established a dictatorship. When a small city dared to say no to the throne and rewrote the meaning of freedom with the death of a woman. Imagine, you live in Rome, but not the Rome of Caesar or Augustus. No Colosseum, no marble columns, no Greek-style democracy. Only a dusty town, smaller than your current neighborhood, tucked inside a walled fortress, where a king rules not by love of the people, but by the silence of the crowd. That king was named Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Arrogant. A man arrogant not only in name but in every act of governance. He abolished the old advisory councils and replaced them with loyal henchmen. Senatus, the Senate, became a shadowy figure, a place where no one dared to object. Nobles who dared oppose him were exiled, their property confiscated, their homes burned. Tarquinius built massive structures, like the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, but forced commoners into unpaid hard labor for months. He demanded tributes from nearby regions, crushing all voices with violence. No one dared write laws. No one dared ask questions. Rome, under his hand, was not a city-state, but a silent cage. A man who seized the throne with blood after killing the previous king and declaring the throne his own. He ruled with no election, no consent, no reason, only power. The people feared him more than respected him. And in a place without the word citizenship, that was all you could do, live in silence. But then everything changed, not by a law, not by an army, but by a rape. Lucretia, wife of a Roman noble, was raped at home by Tarquin's son, Sextus. She did not fight back with a sword. She committed suicide but left behind her account and a declaration written in blood. If honor cannot be preserved, then at least it can die with the one who held it. Lucius Junius Brutus, Tarquin's nephew, carried Lucretia's body into the public square. That very night, in the house of Collatinus, Lucretia's husband, a group of Roman nobles gathered in secret. They wore no armor, had no soldiers, only one vow: to overthrow the Tarquin monarchy. In that cramped room, by the dim light of oil lamps, Brutus held the dagger Lucretia had used to kill herself, raised it high, and declared, "Instead of waiting for justice from the one who murdered it, we will create justice ourselves." From the death of one woman, those men laid the first foundation for revolution, not for power, but for honor, for liberty, for a Rome without kings. He roared his vow: "I swear, no more kings in Rome. No one shall die to protect their honor ever again." From a funeral came a revolution. From a scream came a government. The Roman Republic was born. Tarquin did not accept this. He sought help from King Lars Porsena of Etruria, bringing an army to reclaim Rome. But this time, Romans did not fight for a king, but for something they had just discovered: freedom. Horatius Cocles, a lone warrior, stood guarding the Sublicius bridge, holding off the enemy long enough to destroy the bridge and prevent the tyrant's return. Tarquinius was defeated. Not only did he lose the throne, he lost the right to be remembered as a king. After that, he lived in exile. A man who once sat on the throne now knocking on the doors of Etruscan city-states, begging for aid. But no one wanted to help a wandering tyrant. He once had hope in the city of Gabii, but that was the very place he had once betrayed. No one trusted him anymore. No one wanted to bring him back. In the end, Tarquin died quietly in foreign land. No statues, no medals. No one sang epics for the one who once spread fear. His death, like the final whisper of a monarchy that had lost its power. Brutus became one of the first two consuls, not kings, but magistrates. Power was divided. Each held authority for only 1 year. No one could decide alone. A new system was born, not perfect, but enough to prevent power from becoming eternal. Alongside it were the Senatus, the Senate, and Comitia, the citizen assembly, where law was no longer the king's will, but something debated. Not long after, a case shook the new republic. Brutus's 2 sons were discovered plotting to help Tarquin return. Brutus didn't beg, didn't hide it, didn't weep. He ordered the execution of his own sons in the square in front of the people. A father shed tears, but not his principles. A leader who understood. If justice bears based on affection, then it is no longer justice. Rome learned its first lesson. Freedom only has value when even the strongest are bound by law. Rome, for the first time, understood a concept the entire world would later pursue. Not to be a subject, but to be a citizen. When the Romans began to learn how to govern themselves and discovered that freedom isn't cheap, no king, no more throne, only mortals left, with trembling hands but hearts full of longing, to build a form of government never before seen on Italian soil, a republic. It began with 2 consuls, elected each year. No inheritance, no throne passed from father to son. No one person held power forever. Power, for the first time, was cut into pieces, then divided among people, councils, and election processes. Senatus, the Senate, where nobles argued and schemed. Comitia Centuriata, the People's Assembly, where citizens had the right to vote on laws and officials. A grand experiment, a risky gamble. Even between the very first two consuls, Brutus and Collatinus, cracks had already begun to show. Brutus, the hero who overthrew the Tarquin dynasty, was hailed by the people. But Collatinus, husband of Lucretia, bore the name Tarquinius. Though unrelated to the cruelty of the last king, Collatinus was still seen as a lingering shadow of monarchy. The Senate demanded his resignation. The people turned their backs coldly. Brutus, his own close friend, did not defend him, and Collatinus, at the peak of his glory, quietly gave it all up. A first lesson for the young republic. The cost of freedom is an unrelenting suspicion toward anyone ever touched by the throne. But ideals can't be built on one-sided belief, and freedom does not arrive all at once for everyone. While the nobles, patrici, built the new republic, the lower class, plebe, farmers, craftsmen, poor soldiers, had no voice in the political machinery. They had to pay taxes, had to serve in the army, had to die on the battlefield, but they had no right to know why, no right to vote on laws, no right to oppose the senators. The republic, it turned out, wasn't for everyone. Then, in year 494, before the Common Era, they rose up, not with weapons, but with withdrawal. An entire force of armed farmers left Rome, climbed to the Aventine Hill, and swore not to return until they had political representation. That was the first secession of the plebs, secessio plebis. A great strike without a single shot, but one that shook the very roots of the republic. The result, tribunus plebis, the tribune of the plebs, was established. For the first time, the commoners had an official representative with the power to veto laws from the Senate. From then on, Rome had two parallel forces: Senatus, the aristocratic senators; Populusque, the people. From those two halves, the greatest Roman mantra was born. One day, at the official record office of the Roman state, a young scribe bowed over a wooden desk. His hand trembled slightly from the cold, from fear, and from what he was about to write. Above the sheepskin scroll, under the heading reserved for supreme power, instead of the name of a king, he wrote, SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanus. The ink bled slightly from his sweaty hand, but the words still appeared clearly, like an unspoken vow. From now on, power comes from both the Senate and the Roman people. An imperfect government, a society still unjust, but it was the first place in all the ancient world where people began to ask, who has the right to rule? For whom? For how long? And who will watch the ones who rule? The Roman Republic was not born from utopia. It was born from outrage, from injustice, from the tireless efforts of those who had nothing but the belief that they too were citizens. Not every revolution begins with the sound of swords. Some begin with silence and the sound of footsteps walking away. In year 494 before the Common Era, Rome trembled, not because of war, but because of a withdrawal. When the plebeian class, farmers, blacksmiths, builders, poor soldiers, grew tired of being treated like ghosts in the Republic, they didn't riot. They left. An entire militia marched up to the Aventine Hill, carrying dry rations, children, and a deep contempt for those still calling them fellow citizens. No one fought, no one died, but Rome nearly collapsed, because when there were no soldiers, no craftsmen, no one to collect taxes, build roads, harvest grain, forge spears, then the Republic was nothing more than a dream no one could carry. Secessio plebis, the secession of the plebs. There, among the rocky hills and silence, the Romans did what no one before them had ever done. They used absence as a political weapon. The Senate panicked, sent envoys up the hill. They begged, they bargained, offered terms, then retracted them. But the plebeians had tasted the flavor of existence, and they no longer wished to return as shadows. In the end, Rome bowed, and the tribunus plebis, tribune of the plebs, was born. Tribunus, the one who could say no to even the senatus. The tribunus didn't wear a purple toga, didn't sit on a golden chair, had no bodyguards. At first, there were only 2 tribunes, elected yearly by plebeians in the plebeian assembly. They had no legislative power, no military command, no judicial authority, but they had what nobles feared most: sacrosanctitas, the right of inviolability. If anyone dared touch them, it was sacrilege. It was defiance against all plebeians. It was an assault on the pride of thousands of barefoot people who had once withdrawn to the hills, and they had the power to veto any law that harmed plebeians. The first to hold this position, Lucius Sicinius Velutus, entered the forum not with grandeur, but with the faith of an entire class. From that moment on in Rome, if the Senate represented the rationality of the nobles, then the tribune became the conscience of those without shoes. The Roman Republic was never a paradise. It was an endless negotiation between those with power and those demanding to be heard. But since year 494 before the Common Era, no one in Rome could forget that simple lesson. Sometimes you have to walk away to be seen. A precedent for resistance without swords. The Secessio plebis didn't just save the Republic from collapse. It left behind another legacy, quiet but profound. Rome, at that moment, became the first civilization in ancient history to recognize that collective withdrawal could shift the balance of power. No blood spilled, no war horses, only footsteps, and the purposeful absence of a people. And from that point on, any political system, no matter how strong, would have to be wary of those who chose not to be present. Not everyone could read. But from that moment on, Romans knew justice could not be whispered in the dark. The plebeians had a voice, but they had no laws. For half a century after the Republic was founded, all laws, from land ownership to marriage to punishment, existed only in the heads of the nobles, written by memory, reviewed by word of mouth, enforced in the shadows. The plebeians weren't allowed to know the laws, but they still had to live, pay taxes, and be judged by them. And then they got angry. Decemviri, 10 men with more power than the Senate. Before the bronze tablets came to be, the Romans sent 2 envoys to Athens to study the laws of Solon, a legendary Greek lawgiver. That journey wasn't just to learn laws, but a confession. Their young republic had much to learn from the world beyond. In year 451 before the Common Era, under pressure from the plebeians, the Senate agreed to establish a council of 10 men, Decemviri legibus scribundis, to write Rome's first official laws. For the first time, laws weren't held by one class. They were debated, argued, amended, and finally engraved on 12 bronze tablets placed at the center of the forum. Anyone could read them. Anyone could point to them. Anyone could say, "This is the law and I belong to it." Law and the dark side of power. Even those who wrote the laws couldn't escape the temptations of power. One of the decemviri, Appius Claudius Crassus, not only bent the law to his will, but manipulated the process to illegally reappoint himself, which was forbidden by the council's original terms. It showed, writing the law is one thing, living by it is another. But as with every form of progress, betrayal came along. In year 450 before the Common Era, a new group of decemviri was chosen to complete the code. Among them was Appius Claudius Crassus, an ambitious noble who abused his power to force himself on a plebeian girl named Virginia. Her father, Lucius Virginius, rushed back from the front lines and stabbed his daughter in the middle of the forum to preserve her honor. And once again, just like the death of Lucretia, the blood of a woman became the spark for an uprising. The decemviri were overthrown. The plebeians returned. The 12 tables remained. But the Romans had learned something more. Law without oversight is just another throne. From then on, Romans never allowed any one person to hold all the laws without a counterbalance. And the 12 tables, though primitive, harsh, and often outdated, became the first foundation of all Western legal systems, not because they were perfect, but because they were written so everyone could read them. Legacy and an echo through the ages. The 12 tables, though only fragments remain in ancient quotations, are still the first symbol of justice made visible to the human eye. Romans taught their children to memorize each law. Cicero, the great orator, once said, "Those 12 tables are worth more than all the libraries of Greek philosophy, if measured by their usefulness to society." For over 1,000 years afterward, every Western legal system, from Justinian in Eastern Rome to Napoleon's Code and even modern civil law, echoed the shape of those bronze slabs. No one preserved all 12 intact, but every system was laid upon their foundation. There are failures that not only make us fall, but force us to look back, who we are and what is worth surviving for. The root cause, Clusium and the 3 Fabii brothers. Before Rome was burned, there was a plea for help from Clusium, an Etruscan city-state, when the Gauls began threatening their borders. The Romans, acting as mediators, sent the 3 Fabii brothers as envoys. Instead of maintaining neutrality, they joined the battle, violating sacred diplomatic protocols. The Gauls, enraged by this action, demanded that Rome surrender the 3 violators. Rome refused, and so the Gauls turned their army southward, not for honor, not for conquest, but simply to punish a refusal. The lingering obsession, dies aliensis, the day of omen. The Romans, being superstitious, never forgot July 18th, the day of the Battle of Allia. After that disaster, Dies Aliensis was remembered as the darkest day in the Republic's history and was considered taboo. For centuries afterward, no one initiated campaigns, married, or held festivals on that day. They said only madness would choose the day Rome fell to start something new. In year 390 before the Common Era, barbarian warriors from the north, the Gauls, did something no one had dared before. They approached Clusium, defeated the Roman army at the Battle of Allia, and then, like a flood, poured into Rome. The city was undefended, unprepared, unbelieving that it could happen, and so Rome was burned. Capitoline, the last hill of resistance. As the city was engulfed in flames, a small group of soldiers and senators held out on Capitoline Hill, the sacred and military center of Rome. They survived amid smoke and fire by collecting rainwater, eating grass, and sharpening swords with the faint hope that the Gauls would leave if paid in gold. According to legend, when night fell and the Gauls sneaked up the hill, the sacred geese of the goddess Juno squawked loudly, waking the guards, saving all of Rome from complete collapse. Rome, literally, was saved by the cry of a domestic animal. Vae victis, woe to the vanquished. Brennus, the Gaulish leader, agreed to withdraw if Rome paid a large amount of gold. When the Romans complained that the scales were rigged, Brennus threw his sword onto the scale and said, Vae victis, woe to the vanquished. Rome was humiliated, but not dead. From the ashes, a vow of rebirth. When the Gauls withdrew, Rome was a ruin, devastated and haunting. Some senators wanted to abandon the city, to move to Vae, a larger, safer city. But one man stood up, Camillus, who had been exiled, now returned as a symbol of Rome. He shouted amidst the ruins of the Senate, Rome is not just bricks, Rome is us. The people stayed and began to rebuild the city with bare hands. Camillus, the man who returned from exile. Few remember that, before becoming the hero who saved Rome, Marcus Furius, Camillus had been convicted and forced to leave the city. He was accused of corruption after the victory at Veii and departed with his honor in tatters. But in the darkest hour, he was recalled as an unexpected symbol of hope. Not only did he bring reinforcements, Camillus brought back something Rome had lost, the belief that Rome deserved to live on. Lesson from the ashes, never be complacent. The Battle of Allia and the sack of year 390. Before the Common Era etched into Roman memory like a collective nightmare. From then on, the Romans built higher walls, established a standing military force, and most importantly, never forgot that freedom must be protected, not just by laws, but by swords. Those walls didn't just keep Rome safe. They taught Rome that survival doesn't lie in myths, but in not repeating mistakes. Rome lost, but did not submit, and from that failure, they began to build an empire. Before mastering the world, Rome had to learn to survive amidst mountain mists and the traps of cunning neighbors. 3 wars and a 50-year lesson. The Samnites, mountain warriors living southeast of Latium, lacked the glory of Carthage or Greece, but they had rugged terrain, strong military traditions, and a deep hatred for Rome. 3 wars spanned nearly half a century. First war from year 343 to 341, before the Common Era, a favourable start for Rome, but their alliances, especially with the Campanians, began to fracture. Second war, from year 326 to 304 before the Common Era. This was the real test. The Samnites used the terrain to outmaneuver the Roman army. Third war, from year 298 to 290 before the Common Era. No longer isolated conflicts. This was total war, involving many parties, including the Etruscans and Gauls. Caudine Forks in year 321 before the Common Era, when the Romans had to pass under the yoke. No one in Rome forgot Caudine Forks. It was the year 321 before the Common Era, and the Roman army was trapped in a narrow mountain pass with no escape. The Samnites didn't massacre. They humiliated, forcing all Roman soldiers to pass under the yoke of shame, 2 spears forming a frame, a symbol of surrender. Rome had never been so humiliated, but had never learned so quickly. Battle of Loutulae in the year 315 before the Common Era, when Rome nearly lost all of Latium. The Second War suffered heavy losses when the Samnites unexpectedly defeated the Romans at Loutulae. They opened a path into central Latium, threatening Rome. Rome was pushed back to its home turf, and Latin allies began to waver. This painful fall forced Rome to restructure its army and strengthen alliances to avoid isolation. Via Appia, a road paved with calculations and fear, in the year 312 before the Common Era. As the war with the Samnites continued, Rome knew they needed more than brave legions. They needed roads. In the year 312 before the Common Era, Appius Claudius Caecus, an ambitious censor, ordered the construction of a stone road connecting Rome to Capua. The road was paved with basalt, cutting straight through unstable regions, like a strategic declaration in stone. Via Appia wasn't just for travel, but for suppression, supply, and deploying legions directly to the front lines. This road didn't end the Samnite War, but laid the foundation for how Rome used infrastructure to conquer the world, mountain paths, and tactical reforms. From defeat, Rome learned strategic lessons. You can't fight in mountains like on plains. You must have flexible units. You must build a network of military roads for supply, retreat, and counterattack. Rome began building roads, strengthening forts, and developing military camps, precursors to later Roman cities. The Samnites taught Rome guerrilla warfare, but Rome turned that lesson into imperial tactics. Sentinum, in the year 295 before the Common Era, when everyone fought against Rome. The Battle of Sentinum was the climax of the Third Samnite War. Rome faced a coalition of Samnites, Gauls, Etruscans, and Umbrians. This was the largest battle in Italy up to that point, and Rome nearly fell. Until Publius Decius Mus, the Roman general, sacrificed himself following the devotio ritual, riding his horse straight into enemy lines to purchase victory with his life. Rome won, but it was a victory bought with blood. Samnites fell, Rome rose as a peninsular power. In the year 290 before the Common Era, the Samnites surrendered. No alliance was strong enough to oppose Rome in Italy. The Romans now knew how to fight in mountains, knew how to face enemies not easily subdued, and most importantly, they understood that to maintain victory, they had to learn from defeat. 3 wars, 2 civilizations, 1 hatred that couldn't be resolved until blood filled the Mediterranean. The First War from year 264 to 241 before the Common Era, when Rome learned to row by mouth. Rome had no navy. Carthage was the master of the seas, but Rome had something Carthage didn't: stubbornness. When war broke out over a dispute in Sicily, Rome immediately built ships, and because they didn't know how to fight at sea, they built boarding bridges onto enemy ships to turn naval battles into land battles. That weapon was called the corvus, a hooked bridge connecting their ship to the enemy's. Result: Carthage lost because they didn't expect to get grabbed by the collar right on their own ships. Rome took Sicily, its first territory outside the peninsula, marking the start of transmarine expansion. 2. The Second War from year 218 to 201 before the Common Era. Hannibal and the obsession of crossing the Alps. Hannibal, the young general of Carthage, brought war elephants and an unswallowable grudge. He crossed the Alps, bringing war into the very heart of Italy. Rome was crushed in battles like Trasimene and Cannae in year 216, before the Common Era, where over 50,000 Roman soldiers died in a single day. All of Rome lived in fear. Mothers whispered to scare their children, "Hannibal ante portas." Hannibal is at the gates. But Rome didn't fall. They didn't win by one battle, but by attrition. They sent Scipio Africanus around to Spain, then struck directly into Carthage's homeland. Battle of Zama in year 202, before the Common Era. Hannibal was finally defeated, and Carthage had to sue for peace. The Third War from year 149 to 146 before the Common Era, when Rome decided to erase its enemy's name. Even after losing, Carthage recovered. And that scared Rome. Cato the Elder, a Roman senator, ended every speech with one line: "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. Rome sent an ultimatum. Carthage refused. And so for the final time, Rome marched out. The city of Carthage was besieged for 3 years, its people fighting to the last man. When Rome entered, they left nothing, only ashes and a warning. Carthage was erased from maps. Its name was removed from official records, and its land, as rumor has it, was sown with salt, so nothing could grow again. 4. Rome saw blood and learned to rule by fear. 3 wars didn't just destroy a city-state. They taught Rome that its greatest enemy was unresolved hatred. After the Punic Wars, Rome became the master of the Mediterranean, but the price was a soul gone numb. No longer the old republic, Rome was now a debt collector through war. And the world, from then on, had to learn to live in the shadow of an empire. When the enemy of the republic no longer came from outside, but sat right on the stone steps of the Forum. The pain of victory. In year 133 before the Common Era, Rome had just completed a century of glorious victories. Carthage was destroyed, Macedonia annexed, Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East were gradually becoming its map. But in the midst of glory, cracks began to show. Soldiers returning from war no longer had land to farm. Land had fallen into the hands of the aristocracy, who grew richer after each war, not by fighting, but by buying lives cheap. The Republic was blooming into an empire, but its heart, the commoners, had started to rot. 2. Tiberius Gracchus, the man who dared to redistribute land. In year 133 before the Common Era, Tiberius Gracchus, a young tribune, stood before the Forum and asked a simple question. Why does the man who fought for Rome have no land to live on? He proposed the land reform law, Lex Sempronia Agraria, which clearly stated that no individual could own more than 500 jugera of public land, about 125 hectares, and the excess would be redistributed to the poor. A bold, beautiful idea, and one that made enemies everywhere. The aristocrats called him an agitator. The Senate refused to fund it. Tiberius responded by using the treasury of the king of Pergamon to carry out the reform, making him both hated and feared. More notably, Tiberius wasn't a stranger to the aristocracy. He was the grandson of Scipio Africanus, the great general who defeated Hannibal, a noble heir daring to betray his class, to stand with those who had nothing. That year, right inside the Temple of Jupiter, while running for a second term, Tiberius was beaten to death by Roman senators. His body was thrown into the Tiber River. No trial, no funeral. Just a warning written in blood. Don't touch the ruling class's interests. Third, Gaius Gracchus, when reform came with fury. 10 years later, his younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, appeared, no longer as gentle as his brother. He didn't just want land back, he wanted subsidized grain, free military equipment, and citizenship for non-Roman Italians. He built roads, created granaries, and organized tribunals against corrupt officials. And then he too was deemed dangerous. A law was passed, giving the Senate the power to protect the Republic at all costs, meaning kill without trial. In year 121 before the Common Era, Gaius Gracchus and his supporters were hunted across Rome. He chose to take his own life on the Aventine Hill, not letting his enemies have the glory of killing him. 4. 2 corpses, and a republic never the same. Tiberius died for redistributing land. Gaius died for cheap grain. But both raised questions unanswered. Who truly owns Rome? The soldier or the noble? The people or the Senate? Their deaths were the prelude to a long symphony of division, civil war, and those who used the name of the Republic to seize everything. And from then on, Rome was no longer a place of dialogue, but where opposition became a death sentence. Not invading enemies, but former allies. Not to destroy Rome, but to become part of it. An empire of injustice. At the start of the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic had spread across the Italian peninsula, but citizenship, the ultimate privilege, was reserved for the few. Italian allies, from Samnium, Apulia to Campania, had fought, paid taxes, and died in battle for Rome. But when they asked for the right to vote, to be protected under Roman law, all they got was cold silence from the Senate. No one saw this more clearly than Marcus Livius Drusus, a moderate tribune. He proposed granting citizenship to Italian allies, and not long after, he was assassinated. That was the spark to a great blaze. In an effort to escape the spectre of war, Rome's political body slowly splintered. In choosing allies, Lucius Julius Caesar, a cousin of Julius Caesar, proposed the Lex Julia, granting citizenship to those allies who remained loyal. A dramatic turning point, but also the start of endless reforms. Second, when allies became enemies. In year 91 before the Common Era, Italian states formed their own nation, called Italia, with a capital at Corfinium, renamed Italica, with a senate, currency and generals. They didn't want to break Rome. They wanted to become it. The social war, bellum sociale, broke out not from hatred, but from the longing to belong. The Italians who once fought under the same banner now faced each other on the same battlefield. The third, a republic staggering between blood and compromise. The war lasted 3 years with tens of thousands dead, but every Roman victory came with an undeniable truth. You can't kill the desire to be a citizen with swords. In year 90 before the Common Era, in a reluctant but meaningful act, Rome passed the Lex Julia, granting citizenship to all remaining loyal allies, and later extended it to the entire peninsula, not out of generosity, but because there was no other choice. A new Rome, and another seed begins to sprout. The Italians won what they wanted, the right to be called Roman citizens. But that victory left another legacy, the rise of local generals like Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who would soon use the very name of defending the Republic to bury it. The social war didn't just expand Rome's embrace. It was also the last time citizen still meant unity. After that, the word Rome no longer meant just a city, but an empire learning to swallow what it once refused. When two great men no longer looked toward the same enemy, but looked at each other, like two distorted mirrors reflecting the collapse of a republic. Heroes who couldn't share the same sky. Lucius Cornelius Sulla and Gaius Marius were once two heroes of Rome. One was a cold, aristocratic general who believed in traditional order. The other, a self-made man, son-in-law of the poor, the one who once saved Rome from disaster in the wars against Jugurtha and the Germanic tribes. They once fought side by side, but power does not share a bed, and the past, no matter how glorious, cannot hold back the hunger to command the future. 2. Who would lead the war against Pontus? In year 88 before the Common Era, while the Republic was still recovering from the social war, the kingdom of Pontus under King Mithridates VI in Asia Minor rebelled, killing tens of thousands of Roman citizens in Asia. The Roman Senate gave command of the campaign to Sulla, according to protocol. But Marius, though old, refused to stand aside. He lobbied the democratic tribune, overturned the decision, an act never seen before. Sulla, then stationed near Rome, did what no one had dared do before. He marched on the city. 3rd, the city of Rome, no longer inviolable. For the first time in history, a Roman army knocked on the gates of Rome not to defend it, but to seize it. Sulla took the city, killed opponents, forced Marius into exile. But when Sulla left for the east to fight Pontus, Marius returned, and he was no more merciful. In year 87 before the Common Era, Marius reclaimed Rome, executed many of Sulla's supporters. He died soon after, but enough blood had spilled to turn personal rivalry into the seed of civil war. 4. The name Republic in the hands of the strong. When Sulla returned from the east in year 83 before the Common Era, he brought with him a victorious army and vengeance that had not yet slept. The Battle of the Colline Gate in year 82 before the Common Era sealed the fate. Sulla triumphed. He did not declare himself king. He did not declare himself emperor. He took the title Dictator Legibus Faciendis et Rei Publicae Constituendae Causa, dictator for the making of laws and the re-establishment of the Republic. But he killed thousands through the proscription list. Anyone named on it had their property confiscated, their lives made worthless. When the Republic wore a bloody mask. Sulla stepped away from politics in year 79 before the Common Era, an act as strange as the man himself. But the wounds he left never healed. He was the first to prove. Whoever controls the army controls the Republic. From then on, Rome no longer fought for ideals, but for the names of generals, Pompey, Crassus, Caesar. And the Republic cracked more each day, not from without, but from within. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. One step cannot be taken back, and Rome would never return to what it once was. In year 49 before the Common Era, Gaius Julius Caesar, after nearly a decade of campaigning in Gaul, returned with an army loyal to him alone. The Senate ordered he must disband, return as a regular citizen. Caesar stood before the Rubicon River, the sacred boundary between province and center of power. He did not stop, and the phrase alea iacta est, the die is cast, rang out like a funeral bell for the idea of the classical republic. Pompey Magnus, once an ally in the first triumvirate, Caesar, Crassus, Pompey, now became an opponent. Rome split in two, one half behind Pompey, defender of the republic, one half behind Caesar, man of the people. In year 48 before the Common Era, at the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar won, despite being outnumbered. Pompey fled to Egypt and was assassinated upon arrival, not by Caesar, but by King Ptolemy III, who hoped to please Rome's new strongman. Caesar wept at the sight of his old friend's bloody head. In Egypt, he met Cleopatra VII, and history turned. They didn't just share a night, but a dream. She wanted her throne restored. He wanted to reshape the empire on his terms. Caesar helped Cleopatra defeat Ptolemy, then stayed in Egypt for nearly a year. When he returned to Rome, he brought no war spoils. He brought a new vision of power, centralized, unbound, above tradition. In year 46 before the Common Era, Caesar was declared dictator for 10 years, then dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. But he didn't just take the seat. He changed how the regime functioned, reformed the Roman calendar into the Julian calendar, still used today, redistributed land, pardoned enemies, expanded citizenship to far provinces. But each reform only deepened the rift between him and the traditional aristocracy. For to them, power was not for benevolence. Power was something to be shared. On March 15th, year 44 before the Common Era, the Ides of March, Caesar entered the Curia Pompei, the Senate house. He knew he was opposed, but he didn't expect the betrayal to come from Brutus, the son of a woman he had once loved like family. 23 stab wounds, aimed not at a man, but at a future they feared. As he collapsed, Rome did not rejoice. It shuddered. Caesar died. But his death did not save the Republic. It threw open the gates for yet another round of civil war, in which Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, would follow in his footsteps and never relinquish power like Sulla once did. And from then on, the title Imperator, once just the cheer of soldiers, became a crown without a kingdom. You don't kill a republic with a single stab. You bury it handful by handful with exhaustion, with a longing for peace, with a desire for someone strong enough to say, "I'll do it for you." After the death of Julius Caesar, a young man of only 18 appeared, Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew, adopted son, and according to the will, sole heir. The Senate ignored the slender boy. They didn't know they had just opened the gates for the one who would take everything. To deal with the faction that killed Caesar, Brutus Cassius, Octavian temporarily joined hands with two of his uncle's old enemies, Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus. In year 43 before the Common Era, they formed the Second Triumvirate, not to share power, but to purge. Thousands were placed on the death list. Cicero, the final voice of the Republic, was executed. His head hung on the rostra, as a reminder that words could no longer save Rome. At the Battle of Philippi in year 42 before the Common Era, the Octavian-Antony alliance defeated Brutus and Cassius. Brutus committed suicide, and with him, the idea of a Senate-based Rome also fell. No one dreamed of a republic anymore. People began to dream of stability. After the victory, the three triumvirs gradually eliminated each other. Lepidus was removed from the game. Antony, deeply enamored with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, drifted away from Roman ideals, choosing Alexandria as his center of power. In year 32 before the Common Era, Octavian accused Antony of betraying Rome for an Eastern woman. The Roman people roared, not out of patriotism, but because they feared a second Caesar in the south. On September 2nd, year 31 before the Common Era, the naval battle of Actium took place. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was utterly defeated. A year later, they committed suicide in Alexandria. Octavian entered Egypt. No one dared call him king, but no one had the right to call him a fellow citizen anymore. The Roman Republic did not die on a specific day. There was no funeral, no eulogy. Only the silence of the Senate and the lowered eyes of those who once believed in the voice of the people. In year 27 before the Common Era, Octavian called himself Augustus, the revered one. He did not abolish the Republic. He kept the name, kept the titles. It's just that everything now belonged to him.